Okay, let's unpack this. Think about a world, built on like centuries of quiet power, whispered elegance, deep heritage, this almost sacred sense of exclusivity. Now, picture that world trying to navigate the blinding glare, the constant noise of platforms like TikTok, Instagram.
Yeah.
That clash, right? That
Yeah.
tension between traditional luxury and big tech's whole digital domain. That's what we're diving into today.
It really is a huge collision of, well, different universes, isn't it? And
Yeah.
the source material we've been looking at, it offers a really insightful take on this.
Right.
It's an article by Marc Abergel, and the title's pretty provocative. Not louder, but higher. Why luxury maisons must reclaim their voice and stage.
Not louder, but higher. I like that. That phrase alone, it signals a totally different approach. Abergel argues that luxury brands, chasing digital visibility, they basically entered into what he calls a Faustian bargain with these tech giants.
The classic deal.
Exactly. So our mission here is to understand that bargain, look at the consequences Abergel points out, and maybe most importantly, explore his ideas, his strategies for how luxury can sort of escape this dependency and, reclaim its influence, its desirability in this digital age.
Yeah. And we're pulling directly from Abergel's analysis, but we're also going to connect his points to what leaders within luxury are saying. We've got comments from LVMH figures like Bernard Arnault, Anish Melwani.
Ah, okay.
So if you're someone who really likes getting into how huge industries deal with these massive shifts and you appreciate getting straight to the key insights, well, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Okay, so let's set that initial scene. How did luxury used to operate? Abergel talks about it being in hushed tones, whispered elegance, curated silence. It wasn't pushed at you.
Yeah.
It was something you sort of stepped into. The power came from the craft, the mystery, and what Abergel calls altitude, that distance, right, between the everyday and the extraordinary.
Exactly right. It was an experience, almost a destination in itself. Now, contrast that with, well, today's digital encounter. Abergel says that now a potential customer's first interaction with a top luxury house is more likely to begin and end in the cacophony of a TikTok feed.
Wow.
Sandwiched between a meme and a political rant.
That's quite a contrast. A quiet sanctuary just dropped into this, digital circus.
Yeah.
So, okay, if it's that stark, why did these brands built on subtlety, on scarcity, why did they even go into these incredibly loud mass marketplaces?
Well, the motivation, Abergel lays it out pretty clearly. It was simple. Visibility. The promise of enormous audiences, the potential for something to go viral on Instagram, YouTube, Google, TikTok. It was just, huge.
Right.
In a world moving so fast online, staying invisible felt like risking becoming irrelevant.
And Abergel argues that chasing that visibility came with a huge cost. He calls it that Faustian bargain. So what exactly did they trade away in this deal?
Okay, so this is really Abergel's core point. He says these big luxury groups, LVMH, Kering, Richemont, they traded their sovereignty, their control over their own story and their own space for that visibility, that chance at virality.
Okay, sovereignty for visibility. How did that trade actually happen? What does surrendering storytelling to algorithms really look like on the ground?
Well, it means handing over the keys, kind of. The platforms dictate the format, right? So those stories once told like rituals, as Abergel puts it, they get shrunk down into swipeable snippets.
Right, the short form content.
Exactly. And the platforms control the reach. Brands have to pay to be seen, even by their own followers sometimes. They control the context, too, putting your beautiful luxury image right next to, anything. And they control the data. That relationship with a potential customer just becomes another data point for their algorithms. So by operating mainly inside these platforms, luxury basically traded authorship control for access to the platform's audience.
And Abergel points to some pretty serious negative consequences from this. What really stands out to you about the impact he describes?
I think the most striking thing is his argument that it's led to this quiet but significant erosion of their most valuable asset, desirability. I mean, think about it. Exclusivity is key to luxury, right? But these platforms, they're built for mass reach. They optimize for viral spread. So that environment inherently flattens exclusivity. The brand's soul, its heritage, its meaning. It risks becoming, as he says, just another data point for the algorithm.
Yeah, that idea of craft, something so human just being reduced to content for the feed, that feels like a real loss. Abergel uses this really strong visual metaphor in the article, doesn't he? showing big tech figures kind of manipulating luxury houses like puppets.
Yeah, it captures his point perfectly that these maisons, these houses, have become tenants in big tech's casino, and they're paying huge rent. He mentions they've spent hundreds of billions of dollars over the last decade.
Billions.
Essentially paying rent just to reach their own customers inside a system that Abergel argues is, well, fundamentally rigged against them, building real long-term value.
And this dependency, it's something Bernard Arnault, the head of LVMH, has actually talked about. Abergel quotes him from the 2025 LVMH General Assembly saying, "We have never wanted to depend on a single channel of distribution or communication."
Which really highlights the bind they're in, doesn't it? They see the risk of relying too much on one thing, but the sheer gravity, the pull of these platforms' reach, it was just hard to resist. And Abergel observes that this dependency, this bargain, it's starting to show its limits. He points to the recent financial slowdown across the luxury sector as one sign. He even notes this shift in global wealth rankings, where big tech leaders recently overtook luxury leaders like Arnault after periods when luxury was right at the top.
Arnault also talked about focusing more on la clientèle affluente, plus pérenne et durable, the affluent clients, the ones who are more permanent, more lasting. That sounds like a strategic move back towards that core direct relationship.
Yeah.
It fits with Abergel's critique of mass platforms, right?
Absolutely. It signals a recognition, I think, that just chasing broad visibility isn't necessarily feeding that core high-value relationship luxury really depends on. And just as these limits are becoming clearer, Abergel identifies something else changing the game, the increasing regulatory pressure on big tech.
Right. He mentions that big U.S. court ruling, April 17th, 2025, where Google was found guilty of illegally monopolizing the digital ad market.
Yeah, and Abergel sees that as much more than just the legal thing. He calls it a signal flare, a sign that the whole architecture of big tech's dominance is cracking. And he notes, similar regulatory efforts are popping up globally, from Brussels to Washington. People are questioning things that used to be just called innovation, but are now being looked at as maybe coercion or monopoly power.
So this moment, this fracture in big tech's power, Abergel sees it as a rare opportunity.
Exactly. An opportunity for luxury brands to strategically, reset the terms of their Faustian bargain, to proactively reclaim their digital sovereignty, their cultural influence, before that dependency gets locked in for good.
Okay, so that brings us to the really crucial part. Abergel's actual plan, his vision for the future, he titles it Reclaiming the Future of Luxury. What's his strategy for getting out of this bargain?
Well, his core argument is that luxury needs to consciously outgrow its reliance on big tech algorithms. And instead of just, renting space on their platforms, luxury houses must build its own digital palaces.
Digital palaces, I like that. Instead of renting space in the casino. Okay, that sounds ambitious. He outlines 4 key things, 4 imperatives for how to do this. Let's break those down. First up, reclaim distribution.
Right. This is basically about owning the customer journey online. Instead of just relying on platforms to show their content, luxury needs to invest seriously in sovereign digital spaces. Think really sophisticated, content-rich websites, maybe bespoke apps, private digital communities, spaces that are curated, protected, and insulated from the noise of mass media, where finding something feels intimate, personal, where the storytelling is immersive, not, interrupted or squeezed by what the platform demands.
So less like seeing a pop-up ad, more like getting a private gallery viewing, but online.
Precisely. It's about controlling that environment. The second imperative he talks about is rebuild cultural intimacy.
Cultural intimacy. What does that mean in practice?
Well, Abergel reminds us that luxury has its own rhythm, its own tempo. Think about the way haute couture collections are revealed, very carefully orchestrated, or the slow, detailed process of making a fine watch. He argues luxury needs to reclaim that tempo instead of feeling pressured to constantly churn out fast content for the algorithms. Luxury, when it's working best, whispers and the world leans in. It doesn't need to shout constantly to be heard over all the digital noise. So this means fewer interactions, maybe, but higher quality, more meaningful ones.
That connects right into the third point, doesn't it? Assert narrative sovereignty.
Exactly. This is about taking back control of the story itself. No more squeezing these complex histories and craft narratives into, swipeable snippets. Luxury needs to tell rich, layered, timeless stories. Stories that explain the craft, the heritage, the inspiration. Stories that make a product feel like a legacy piece and turn a client into more of a curator. Someone really invested in that story, not just a consumer scrolling past.
Makes sense. And the last one, invest in cultural infrastructure.
Yeah, this is the long game. It's about building permanent digital infrastructures of influence, what Abergel calls cultural operating systems. These could be dedicated platforms or ongoing initiatives for storytelling, for art collaborations, immersive digital events, even digital archives. It's about building desirability based on beauty, intellect, and soul, not on clicks.
So not just marketing campaigns, but building lasting digital institutions that project cultural value.
That's it. He uses another visual showing figures standing on cracked big tech logos labeled Reclaiming the Summit. It shows this isn't just about getting off the platforms, it's about reaching a higher ground altogether.
You know, this really echoes what Anish Melwani, the chairman and CEO of LVMH North America, said recently. Abergel quotes him from the 2025 Milken Institute conference, emphasizing independence. Melwani said, "True luxury is where there's genuine scarcity underneath. Having our Maisons be independent and autonomous allows each Maison to use its own heritage to create that feeling of desirability."
That quote is a perfect match for Abergel's call for sovereignty, isn't it? Building desirability on what's inherent, the real value, not just the fleeting visibility you get from somewhere else. Abergel uses a fantastic analogy to hammer this home about controlling the channel, the context. He asks, would you sell champagne at a gas station?
No, of course not. The setting totally kills the product's value.
Exactly. And the digital environment, that's the new distribution channel. And for luxury, Abergel's saying these current mass platforms, they're the digital equivalent of a gas station. They actually degrade the product and the experience.
He also draws a really interesting parallel to Bernard Arnault's strategy back in the 90s. Arnault invested massively in owning the physical distribution, building those amazing flagship stores, vertical integration.
Right.
Arnault saw those as strategic choices to master the customer experience, not just shops.
And Abergel frames today's digital challenge exactly the same way. Just like luxury had to own the physical store experience to control its image and value, now it has to own the digital platform, the digital narrative. It's not enough anymore to just post an image or run an ad. They need to control the whole digital environment where the brand encounter happens.
So this isn't just like a defensive move because big tech's landscape is shifting. Abergel's actually positioning it as an offensive strategic move.
Precisely. It's rooted in this core belief, which he attributes to leaders like Arnault, that luxury is fundamentally culture, not content. Its real power lies in nuance and resonance, not just noise and reach. You know, Arnault himself said back in 2019 he saw himself as an ambassador of French heritage and foie culture, linking luxury to Versailles, Marie Antoinette, really emphasizing that deep cultural root.
Right.
Abergel's argument is simply that this deep cultural foundation needs its own digital stage to really flourish.
So it forces these luxury maisons to make a really big choice, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Either keep going down the easy path, chasing visibility on mass platforms, but risk eroding their core value.
Or choose the harder path, the more deliberate path of building their own digital world, which needs huge investment, a long-term vision, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it ultimately means reclaiming their story, their control, and ensuring that desirability lasts.
It's like shifting from just renting the stage to actually owning the entire theater production.
Yeah, and Abergel's final point is that this moment, with these regulatory cracks appearing in big tech's dominance, this is the critical time for luxury to make that shift, to move its focus from just visibility towards influence, from chasing reach to cultivating reverence, from being seen everywhere for a second to being felt deeply, meaningfully in spaces they control.
He argues that the brands, the maisons, with the vision and the guts to reclaim this narrative sovereignty, they'll be the ones who not only survive, but actually define what aspiration looks like for the next century. They need to learn to speak again, as he says, not louder, but higher.
It's a really powerful call to action, I think, for an entire industry that's grappling with its identity in this radically changed digital landscape.
So the really distilled takeaway from Marc Abergel's perspective is pretty clear. Luxury is at a crossroads. The old strategy, chasing visibility on mass digital platforms, it came at a cost, a real cost to its core identity, its desirability. But now, because the power dynamics are shifting, there's this opportunity, maybe even a necessity, to consciously choose the other path. Build your own digital infrastructure, reclaim total sovereignty over your narrative, your customer relationship.
Yeah, it means rethinking fundamentally where and how luxury spends its digital dollars, moving away from being, a paying tenant in somebody else's building and moving towards building that direct, resonant connection on your own ground.
Thinking about this challenge for luxury, it makes you wonder about the wider implications. for any brand, really,
Yeah.
or even creators, artists, individuals. What's the real cost long-term of relying so heavily on platforms that are built purely for mass attention, for algorithmic approval, instead of actively trying to cultivate deep connections and build lasting cultural value on a stage you actually control?
That's a fantastic question. It definitely goes way beyond just luxury brands. It kind of forces you to look around and think, okay, which brands, which creators, which voices do you see out there now who seem to be successfully building their own stage? Fostering that direct, meaningful relationship with their audience that feels somehow separate from the constant noise and the shifting rules of the big platforms. How are they managing to get that altitude Abergel talks about?
Definitely something to chew on as you navigate the digital world yourself.